say some people are connected. There'll be three presenters this morning. Myself, I'm the director of CCAFS. Phil Thornton, he's the flagship leader for one of the flagships inside CCAFS. And Pramod Agarwal, who is regional program leader for South Asia. I'm sitting in Copenhagen, Phil is in Edinburgh, and Pramod is in Delhi. We're trying a new technical solution for these web-based seminars. It's a GoToWebinar, and so I hope that we don't get into any technical problems, as it's our very first time trying to use the system. You will all have a box where you can type in questions. You can type in them at any time, and at the end of the seminar we'll try and answer the questions. We won't unmute all the participants. We think that will just create too many technical problems with bandwidths. So we'll do it through the questioning chat box. Oops. So the outline of the talk, I'm going to give some background, and then Phil is going to look at the global and regional impact pathways and targets. Pramod is going to look at the regional coherence. Phil will come back to the planning and reporting system and managing for results, and then I'll finish off with a summary at the end. We think it's going to be 15 to 20 minutes, so it'll be a short seminar, and then time for questions at the end. So targets and results-based management is nothing new in the climate world. The UNFCCC has had something called measurable, reportable, and verifiable, MRV, for greenhouse gases, adaptation actions, finance, and this is essentially results-based management. The Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture, the major initiative launched last year, has a target which the partners want to measure progress towards. The SDG number 13 focuses on climate change, looking at resilience and adaptive capacity and integration of climate measures into national policy. It will also have targets, though they're not clear what they'll be yet. So CCAFS is not in a sort of it's kind of used to this kind of talk within the climate world. So there are major goals within CCAFS of building farmer resilience and reducing emissions, and these fit within the major climate policies. Let me just give you some quick background about CCAFS. So we have 4 flagships. Each flagship has a theory of change and impact pathways. The first flagship is climate smart practices and portfolios. Second one is climate information services and safety nets. Third one is low emissions development, the mitigation side. And the fourth one is policies and institutions for climate resilient food systems. They're very interconnected. And then we work in 5 regions. And it's really at the regional level where the action happens in terms of impact pathways. So while we do try and have coherence at the global level in terms of the flagships, we put much more attention into national and regional impact pathways. The other word that you'll hear this morning is projects. The key feature of a project is that it has to fit into these impact pathways, the regional impact pathways. Also, there's also some projects which are purely globally focused. They're large bodies of work, perhaps up to 1.5 million or even higher. Any kind of funding source, core funding, window 3, bilateral fundings, can be single or multiple centers, can be single regions or multiple regions. The key thing is that they have to fit within the impact pathway. So how did we put the current system into place? So in 2013-2014, we did the results-based management trial on 1 flagship. So we trialed a system with what we thought was the simplest flagship. And then in 2014, we initiated a process of defining the global impact pathways, defining the regional impact pathways, then doing a call for ideas for projects which fitted within these impact pathways. And once the ideas had been selected, we went to regional planning meetings where targets were put up, impact pathways discussed, so that even the projects form a coherent whole within regions. The whole process was highly iterative, feeding back to altering the global impact pathways depending on what happened at the ground level. Also linked into the governance system of CCAFS so that the governance body was happy with the directions that we were going. And then the whole system is linked together with a knowledge platform. We call it the Planning and Reporting System. It's web-based, and Phil will briefly introduce it. So I now hand over to Phil. So Phil, we're not hearing you yet. Still not hearing you, Phil.
Phil, you need to unmute.
Phil, you need to unmute. I can see Phil is talking happily, but we cannot hear him. Phil, you need to unmute.
I am unmuted.
Okay, we can hear you now. You have to start from the beginning.
I was muted by the organizer. I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
So this slide shows the relationship between the projects that Bruce has just described at the bottom of the diagram and the linkages through to the intermediate development outcomes of the CG at the top. And this moves through, so projects contribute to clusters of activities, and of course one project may contribute to more than one cluster of activity, and then these cluster of activities then contribute to both Flagship and to regional outcomes at different time stages. So here we're showing the 2019 outcomes and through to the 2025 outcomes. And so this is the way in which the various elements of CCAFS now fit together. The next one, please, Bruce. And just to give an idea of the targets, the next slide shows. So all flagships have targets quite like this. So this shows Flagship 1. So this is the climate smart agriculture practices example. So on the right-hand side, this is the 2025 target for the Flagship. So it's aiming to reach 30 million farmers by 2025, at least 12 million of whom are women, with strengthened adaptive capacity and food security as a result of programmatic investment. And then we think for 2019, we have two outcome targets that will then contribute towards that 2025 target. And so one of these 2019 targets is related to national and subnational development initiatives, and then the other is related to public-private actors at national and subnational levels. And Bruce, could you please click there? And then these are the regional targets then contribute at all these stages, and then you'll see 2015 and 2016 on the left-hand side. So these are the targets that we think from activities in the various regions will contribute, will start to contribute numbers towards these targets as then we move through to the right to 2019 and through to 2025. Okay, next one please, Bruce.
Now we head over to Pramod, and we hope Pramod's not muted.
Okay, so let me illustrate this whole process with an example from South Asia. As you see from this slide, the South Asia regional vision is to promote large-scale investment in science, informed climate-smart agriculture. which we hope would lead to long-term food security and poverty reduction in the region. Now, to address this, CCAFS has been working to attain several outputs. So here we list 4 major outputs from South Asia, roughly 1 for each flagship. Of course, as was said earlier, there's a lot of interrelationship as well. But as flagship 1 outcome is increased investment in climate smart agriculture practices and technologies. In flagship 2, we are focusing on improved agro-advisories and insurance products. In flagship 3, we are looking forward to getting outputs related to more informed mitigation decisions. And in flagship 4, on climate smart agriculture policies and institutions. All of these outcomes that we are targeting and ultimately long-term impact is based on scientific evidence from all of our research projects, case studies, data, tools, and models. So that's the overall approach that we are following. Next slide, please. Bruce, can we move on to the next slide?
Okay, it's probably taking a while to get from Copenhagen to Delhi.
Okay, so basically what I want to show while the slide is loading, yes, here it is, that, as you know, CCAFS, all CG centers are participating. So these projects were developed by different CG centers around these outcomes and outputs that we just mentioned. These proposals that you see here, it's a little complicated slide, is around each thematic areas, for example, climate smart agriculture, practice and technologies, information services, and so on and so forth. So what we have listed here is the final portfolio that we have. So what you have in blue color is the centers projects, and these projects have started operating now. But at the same time, what you see here, for example, if I just read the number 1, is on climate smart agriculture practices by CEMET, taming floods and droughts by EMI. In terms of local development planning, leading from first project is local adaptation planning project of CEMET. How do we institutionalize crowdsourcing by biodiversity, and so on and so forth. So that's what you see here in greenish blue color, the centers project. We kept some budget aside for the regions to address the portfolio balance, because there were some gaps that were very obvious, and also to supplement the research being done by some of these center projects. For example, we had this project on a prioritization toolkit to support some of the policy research that is being done by IFPRI and some others. These are the colors, these are the projects in brown color. These are the projects that are being supported by region. A critical example is if you look at flagship 2, climate information services, in food security safety nets, we had no project from the center. So regional funds were used to initiate a project on this, modeling food storage planning in view of increasing climatic risk. Similarly on crop yield monitoring systems, and so on and so forth. So several such projects were supported by regions to bridge the gap. At the same time, regions are using these funds to integrate. That's one of the major activities in the region, that all these flagship projects ultimately need to be integrated. So that's again what we are doing in the region using regional funds. Besides integration, developing and implementing an uptake strategy to get to those outcomes is also quite important. My next slide will just show a quick example that how exactly this is being done. So this involves various things. This is an example from CEMET-led project on climate smart agriculture. So this involves various things, including testing technologies, examining gender dimensions, working on policy constraints, and dealing with scaling up of climate smart villages. So the whole impact pathway commits a project to deep engagement with state and national government, seed companies, agricultural implement companies, and ICT providers. Together with other projects, this project feeds into broader national policy dialogue, and also works with NAS. And overall, these dialogues are led by a regional program here, but with all projects participating. I'm very pleased to inform that this type of engagement with stakeholders and this type of evidence building has already borne some fruit, with one large state of India already committing their own resources to scale out climate smart villages to 1,000 number. And in time to come, we see that thing, this type of application happening in many other states. So overall, many of our projects feed into broader national policy dialogues. But what is also very important that what we do in India is also linked to what we do elsewhere in CCAFS through the agreed focus areas on flagships. For example, what we see now, climate smart villages are being tested in almost 20 countries, and not only just India. And all projects have their indicators linked to regional and flagship indicators for monitoring. I would now like to pass on to Phil again for the presentation.
Thank you, Pramod. Now just a couple of slides to give a very quick overview of the planning and reporting platform. So this is the system. It's written in Java and being developed by colleagues at CIAT, David Abreu and his team. And basically this is a piece of software that enables all the projects, including all the themes, all the flagships and the regions, to enter activities. So this is just a screenshot of the first slide. This shows a project description for one particular project, but really just to highlight on the left-hand side of the project menu, as you can see, you can enter project descriptions, you can enter descriptions of the various partners that are involved with the project, the budget over several years, the project outcomes, in other words, how is this particular project really contributing to the flagship and regional outcomes, and then a set of activities. And of course the activities, there may be several, and some may be led by different centres or by different partners. The next one, please, Bruce. Then the process for the P&R, as we call it, for the annual planning. So all planning for the 2015 work has been done using the P&R system, and from that then we can generate the information that's needed for the annual program of work and budget. Then for the reporting cycle, all projects are then going to be reporting against their outcomes, against the targets and the deliverables, and again then these are things that are used. We can generate reports on different topics needed for annual reporting, and importantly then this also helps provide the information for the monitoring and evaluation for the results-based management. Next, please, Bruce. So in terms of managing for results, as we hope we've made clear over the last few minutes, each project has to collect data on the indicators. So this, for the whole of the CCAFS program, just a small number of indicators at 2019 and 2025. So each project then has to demonstrate how they're contributing towards those. Detailed achievements in terms of how they're contributing to the steps along the impact pathway, because of course we recognize that some of these projects may be taking quite a long-term view, and to actually get down the impact pathway may take quite a long time. And each year projects of a particular size need to produce case studies on the outcomes that have actually been achieved. And in this way it's not only projects, but projects, regions and flagships. We all have to provide information in the P&R, and so that annual achievements can then be assessed. And then there are bonus funds that can be allocated for excellent performance, and so performance in terms of things such as how well has the project or flagship been doing in relation to production of outputs or production of outcomes, for example. Next one, please, Bruce. We've had in 2014 we have the results-based management trial for a piece of Flagship 4, and there's various lessons I think that we've learned from that, and also from the broader process of getting the full portfolio for CCAFS. And it's definitely the case that time and resources are needed to implement what's been done. So of course this has to be borne in mind. The second lesson perhaps is that we think it's becoming clear that new capacities may be needed, particularly in project teams or in activity teams, as they're seeking to move much more towards an outcome focus. In particular, this may relate to skills in perhaps communications or engagement that perhaps the CGIAR has not traditionally had so much to do with. But as we move towards this more outcome focus, then many of these things become increasingly important. Another lesson learned would be we need to make the system good enough. So in other words, it's not the best that it could possibly be. As scientists, we often try to get sort of a bit perhaps bogged down in trying to do, to get the best system we possibly can, but really we need to do this on a very practical basis. So what's good enough in terms of helping us to really achieve our outcomes? And the final lesson learned, just to highlight, is in the RBM trial project for projects for Flagship 4, they are actually starting to do things somewhat differently in terms of really taking on board this outcome approach and really taking it seriously and basically trying to do things somewhat differently to the way things have been done in the past. Thanks, Bruce. Just to you for that.
So just the last slide to summarize. So 2014 has really seen a major shift for CCAFS in terms of a whole new portfolio and way of doing business. This attempt to interlink impact pathways right from project level to global levels, and associated with those impact pathways, targets and milestones along the impact pathways that essentially everybody buys into measuring and reporting on. And I think we found the web-based platform really useful in terms of being the source of all the information and putting together this complex array of from project level up to global level. We also see it as a continual learning process for RBM. It's a really adaptive management. We're interested to learn lessons and change the way we're doing business as well. On the website, we have put together some learning briefs on it. There's a wiki where the RBM trialists are contributing to, and a whole lot of M&E resources related to RBM. And I just wanted to end with a slogan, is that, that I think that all of us are dealing with these incredibly complex problems, complex organizational structures, multiple partnerships, but essentially one really has to look for solutions that have to be simple. And that's what our sort of bottom line has been in developing this RBM system. What can we leave out? Every time we try and complicate it, do we really need that in it? And we hope that it's a practical system. But that was it. And now I'm going to open it up to questions, and I hand it back to Martin, who's organizing the question. So if you've got any questions, you could type them into the chat box. So, Phil and Pramod, I'll just repeat one of the questions. So how did we get to the numbers that we're reporting as the targets, is a question. So, I mean, my take on it, and perhaps Phil and Pramod want to add to it, is that it was really iterative as well. And so, for example, the management team and the contact points were at a meeting where we put together the initial ideas for regional impact pathways. We then went to the regional program leaders to get ideas about the numbers that they could be achieved with a certain budget. And those were the numbers that we put in as our initial targets. Then once the projects were developed at the ground level, we got new numbers based on the more realistic bottom-up perspective. So it was an iterative process of getting the numbers. Whether those are the correct and are the correct numbers, of course, is really open to question. I don't know if Pramod or Phil want to add anything.
Perhaps just to add a little bit to that. I mean, I think
if I could just supplement.
Go ahead, Pramod.
Okay, so just to supplement this, what Bruce just said, this was an iterative process, and I would say also we should take these targets not as very absolute targets. This could be somewhat plus minus. So besides management team, there have been intense consultation with the regional let's say, stakeholders through, and also considering budget and considering work plan and relating them with the national priorities. Not that we are trying to do something altogether different, something where we can make an impact. So this, as I said, there were lots of consultation. That's what led to this type of targets.
Phil, one question from Claire. Do we have a list of all the indicators that we'll have to monitor at the project level? Perhaps you could just describe how many there are and those sorts of things, Phil.
Yes, we do. So each, if you remember, I showed the slide for Flagship 1. So there were 2 targets for 2019 and then 1 target for 2025. All the other 3 flagships are exactly the same, and so in total, for the whole of the CCAFS program, we have 8 indicators split among the 4 flagships for 2019, and then 4 targets for 2025. So I think in our that's one. I think that's one of the nice things about the sort of what we've all collectively managed to come up with. We don't have massive numbers of indicators. And of course we're looking not only for, I mean, if there's quantitative information on the indicators, then that's all well and good, but we recognise that oftentimes we may be dealing with much more sort of qualitative evidence of movement of projects towards these indicators. But the actual number of indicators is small, and hopefully the system should be relatively simple.
Another question. We have baseline information as a fairly complete level to start out with. This is from Shoba at Equiset. I think I should leave it to you as well, Phil.
Okay. Yes, on baseline. So again, one of the issues with having a smaller number of indicators is that it implies we have sort of reduced or less demand, if you like, for baselines. For some of the indicators, the sort of responsibility, if you like, for baselines will, it's really sort of, you could say it's distributed through the whole CCAFS program. So it depends on, for example, where a particular project, if a project is working in a country, and we want to know something about sort of what's the, you know, are there national adaptation or commodity plans, for example, do those exist? And maybe the baseline is finding out that, for example, in a particular country there is no adaptation plan, and so that would be the baseline. And because, for example, in Flagship 4, then one of the indicators is the number of countries where CCAFS and CCAFS science has helped to contribute towards an adaptation plan, for example. So the baseline's responsibility for doing that will lie sometimes with the projects, but sometimes with the regions and the flagships. And so one of our jobs is, as I see it, is to help sort of coordinate, to make sure that that everybody has the baseline information that's needed, so that they can then track movement towards these outcomes.
Good. So two participants ask if we can send around the PowerPoint. So we'll definitely make the PowerPoint available. Here's another question, Elizabeth. I think Elizabeth is from WLE, am I right? What you have described is quite similar to a few development practitioners, donors implementing planning, management, and monitoring and evaluation. So what we describe is similar to development initiatives. What differences do we see between development-oriented targets, frameworks versus R4D? That's a nice, challenging question. Let me just, so while my colleagues think about the answer, I'll go on to another one. This is P.K. Joshi from IFPRI in Delhi. Calls for more inter-regional interactions between different flagships would help in developing synergies. I think this is a really important point. So in other words, making sure that we get the different regions better connected with each other. We've started some of that, but we definitely need to do more. Are targets of all flagships independent or add up from different flagships? Yeah. I think I can answer that one. So essentially there are different targets for different flagships. It's largely a management related response, because we do see that there's huge interconnections between the different flagships. But at the moment, there is you would report a different indicator to a different flagship. We don't expect all projects to report to every flagship or to report all indicators. They would only select a small minority of the indicators. What are the, Hope Weber asks, what are the new capacities needed to implement PNR system? So we have two questions. You want to have a go, Phil?
Sure. Actually, I could have a stab at the one on the sort of the differences or similarities between research for development and the sort of the more development-orientated frameworks. So I have a stab at that one. I think I'd see that basically. I mean, I think the impact pathways that sort of the different organisations, different sort of even arenas or different collectives of organisations are working on are really often quite similar, even or heavily overlapping, and so, but perhaps for the research for development organisations, perhaps it means we need to be mindful perhaps of a sort of more a longer impact pathway as we move from sort of research outputs, which the CGIAR is very good at producing, but trying to really make sure that those are connected much further down the impact pathway. So I think in some ways, perhaps what we're attempting to do as sort of research for development organisations is a little bit more. Perhaps our impact pathways are slightly longer when it actually comes to it, because we're trying to get. Obviously, we're a research organisation, and so we're still very much at the sort of research into research outputs end of the spectrum, but then really having to work hard with different kinds of partnerships, with new partnerships, to get towards the outcomes that that need to be that we need to get to. So I'd say it's perhaps mostly the differences are to do with the length of the impact pathway. On the question about the sort of new capacities for the PNR, again, I think this is very much sort of project dependent, and it depends on projects' own impact pathways and the ways that they can really connect towards some of these outcomes and outcome indicators. I think I mentioned very briefly, I think sort of communications is obviously going to become an increasingly important element of what we all do, I think, because it's not just research outputs that we need to produce, but how do we get those actually used, how do we spread the word, spread the messages, encourage other people to use the outputs that we're producing, engagement and different types perhaps of new sorts of partners that perhaps we haven't interacted with very much in the past. How do we do this engagement sort of most effectively, and what are the kinds of things we can do to really help move outputs down towards outcomes? So I think those are some of the new capacities that some projects may need, again depending on sort of the level and the hierarchy that they're working on. Are they working at sort of local level with communities, or are they working at sort of supranational level with, say, negotiators for some of the UNFCCC processes, for example?
Good, thanks, Phil. Hung, you've asked a very sort of contractual issue related to contracting partners. I think I'll get back to you on email on that one. James Kinyangi from ILRI. In monitoring progress, one approach is for the project leaders to track changes from the baseline, but more often management may be interested in third-party outcome evidence. So just pointing to the need to have a verification source for the projects, how do they become confident that they are making sufficient progress? As far as I understand, the projects have put in their targets for the various indicators by year or milestones along the impact pathways, and I would think that they would be needing to achieve those targets to be regarded as sufficient progress. But I guess it's also, we all understand that what we're doing is not a sort of engineering solution to things. So there's going to be failures, and so it's not going to be a perfect progression along planned impact pathways. Shoba asks, can you extract Word or PDF reports from the CCAFS database, either the planning information or the reporting information, without these being in the input of cell formats? Yes, that's definitely possible. We're developing this P&R system as we go on the fly, so all these things are slowly being added. We've definitely extracted, at the moment we've extracted, for example, PDFs on all of the projects so that they can be read much more simpler without having to click numerous boxes. You can make reports in Excel based on the numbers that are inside the P&R, so essentially you can connect the P&R to any output that you need. So as we go along, we're specifying the new kinds of outputs that we need. Are targets formulated with national partners? You want to tackle that one, Pramod?
Yeah, I think we already addressed that. It's not a very structured meeting that we do with national partners all the time, but we do factor in when we plan that what are the national priorities in terms of development, research for development, and then that's how we try to come to these targets.
Yeah, and I should say that the regional planning meetings that you had, the last ones, included a good number of partners as well. So it wasn't only the research community; it was also people along the impact pathway that were part of those meetings. Tom Randolph, livestock and fish, CRP. Indicators and targets are focused on development side and so related to the impact pathways, which responds well to what the consortium office and donors want. It doesn't seem to feed back to the science aspect of the theory of change. Does it miss whether you are generating evidence that you are proving your theory of change? Phil?
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Tom, this is a good question, and I mean, one thing you picked up on obviously was we didn't talk about the CCAFS theory of change at all. Just I think largely because it's because of time constraints. But just to say that I mean I think finding this actually also came up in several of the regional workshops that we've had over the last 12 months. Finding this balance between really good cutting-edge science that's and with sort of development outcomes, how do you do this balance? And I think it's very challenging. But I think if you look at the CCAFS theory of change, which is really to do with sort of generating evidence of what works where, and then moving on to sort of helping to provide this sort of the environment within which climate smart agriculture can really be sort of upscaled and taken on board. I think the science pieces are certainly there, and although I agree we didn't talk about that very much this morning, but I think it's a difficult balance in terms of how you ensure that we're really doing sort of the good science and the right science. And again, I think it also comes back a bit to what Bruce mentioned before about having flexibility. So impact pathways, we're not building a bridge, and we're not looking for engineering solutions to the whole sort of development process. but these are our, we come up with impact pathways, and these are our best estimates of how we think these things are going to work. And of course, sometimes we'll be right, and sometimes often we'll be wrong. But then again, being able to sort of document why we're wrong, and if we've got, for example, perhaps we're working with the wrong partners, or perhaps there is a piece of real basic science that we really have to have in hand before we can really sort of move that forward. And so I think the whole thing of being flexible and self-reflection, and do we have the right things in place to really move us down the impact pathway? So I think in that kind of sort of iterative, flexible way, we can hopefully move a long way towards finding this balance between really good science and development outcomes.
Thanks, Phil. Will the PNR system be able to synthesize reports across region? This is Robert Zugmoor from ICRISAT West Africa. Yes, so Robert, essentially this PNR system can do anything we want. All we have to do is specify it to our programmers. So it will definitely be able to do reports across regions for specific things that are inside the web-based system, inside the database. This is Peter McCormick from ILI. I just lost my questions. Oh, there they are. Can you expand more on the practical simplifications you have focused on? And somewhat related, how do you then address the reporting requirements for the consortium office system? How do you address the reporting requirements at the higher level? So can you expand more on the simplification? So I don't know, Peter, I mean, my take is that scientists often come up with the most complicated systems. If you ever put a scientist to put a system in place, it always seems it comes to become one of the most complicated systems you could ever imagine, which would never be used in the private sector or even by development actors. And so when we started the results-based management system, we had different kinds of indicators, for example, process indicators, outcome indicators, and we had many more indicators. We also had indicators for regions as opposed to flagships. And in the course of 2014, we went through this massive simplification process to make something that was realistic in terms of the time spent on doing monitoring and evaluation. So I think that was one major area of simplification. It was the whole indicators and targets. How do you address the reporting requirements for the consortium so for the higher level reporting? So currently, in the current system of reporting, for example, we have outcome stories, we have case studies on capacity development, all part of the PNR system. And we can then, so for example, if at the higher level we need a report on capacity development, we can then search the database and extract all the information needed for such a report. But it does require, then it requires somebody who's going to look through that information and select the pieces which really fit with the reporting levels at the higher level. I think I'm also right to say that the reporting system for phase 2, and that's what we're really thinking about, has yet to be established. So we would probably have to tweak whatever we've got to meet the needs for the future reporting system at the higher level. I hope that's answered. Phil and Pramod may want to add something about the simplification issue, but if I could just go on to another question. How will the bonus allocation be calculated for excellent performance? So, I think it's a really good question. We've got as part of the results-based management system, we have a proposal for that group of projects which are currently going through the trial. and we will then reflect on how well that's worked or not, together with the project participants in that trial, and then come up for a system, then make a proposal for a system for the end of 2015. Let's see. Perhaps we've got time for another couple of questions, and I've got one from Bill Downing. Was there a need to influence organizational program culture and behaviors to adopt the RBM? If so, how did you manage that? Yeah, I think it's a really good question. So there was, I think it's as Phil put in his lessons learned, it's quite a big change in culture, and there's plenty of resistance. But I mean, essentially, the big carrot we had was the funds. So if you buy into the impact pathways, if you can make a coherent project around the impact pathways, then you can get into the system. So that was a major carrot. I'm kind of believing that some people are not really buying into the system, they're just ticking the boxes. But I'm hoping that the management will be able to identify those kinds of issues, because of the other problem, of course, with results-based management, you may not be able to pick up gaming of the system in the first year. But I think we've put a system in place which is relatively robust to be able to identify those issues. We've at all our meetings with the management team, we have to buy into it ourselves. So we have plenty of discussion around results-based management, its pros and cons. And then when we meet, we only fortunately meet annually with the contact points from the centers, but a part of that is always discussion about results-based management, about performance bonuses, and those sorts of things. At the regional meetings, there was a major emphasis given to the new way of doing business. Peter? Peter, I was thinking more of the many indicators that the consortium office needs, many that don't seem that useful. So this goes back to a very big table of indicators that are needed for the annual reporting. Those, I believe I'm correct in saying, if I was from the consortium office, I would say that those indicators are hopefully going to go away and be replaced by indicators that are much more linked to the theory of change for the entire CGIAR. So unfortunately, our system doesn't exactly buy into that table either. We go through the process of collecting those indicators, but we're also kind of hoping that they will disappear and be replaced by indicators that better represent the theory of change of CCAFS. I think that may be the last question. Phil, do you want a last word?
Perhaps just to add a tiny bit to the response about the institutional change issue. And I mean, I think we're all collectively learning in this. I mean, very much the CCAFS team as well as everyone else. And I think there's also, there's a lot of literature and there's a lot of information about how some of these, how can you do results-based management and how do you do monitoring and evaluation. But I think there's a lot of sort of co-learning as we go, and one of the things that we're trying to put in place this year is a sort of support pack that can sort of really help everybody sort of do this stuff better. So it's similar in a way to what we did with the data management, just sort of having a set of resources online that people can access that hopefully people find useful in trying to do this better. Because as I say, we're all learning as we go, and we're looking at I mean, we're never going to get to this sort of this massively perfect system. We're looking at sort of smallish incremental changes, incremental steps towards where we want to get to. So I think the sort of being the sort of collegial support, I think it's very important, and this is something that for the PNR and the M&E we're really trying to get to grips with during this coming year.
Pramod, any last words?
No, except that this has been a fairly exciting process, and I think there are lots of opportunities for us to make our research much more relevant to the needs of the society. So we are really looking forward to this, learning more lessons and seeing some great applications.
So perhaps I could just end off and say thanks for all your questions. We have them all, and we'll keep reflecting on them. And I think Pramod indicated the excitement of the process. So, although perhaps scientists, when first introduced to this, find it a bit daunting, completely new, I'm also incredibly excited by the possibilities. And Pramod actually, perhaps after drinking too many whiskies, mentioned to me, because he's a wonderful scientist with a huge publication risk, and he mentioned to me, he said, Bruce, why didn't I do this 20 years ago? It would have been so much more rewarding. And I think that's the way a lot of us feel, is that if we can really target our science to have these outcomes, we can achieve some great results. So we're very excited by the system that we've put in place, but we're very willing to learn and change and adopt. So thanks, everybody, for contributing. And we'll get back to you perhaps on some individual questions. Thanks a lot.